We are back on It's Always Game Day in Cincinnati. Some news, some combine, some cool stuff to get into. Cool guy. Max Toscano here. Lindsay will miss. She's on vacation, so it's a fun miss, not something that is tragic. And Max is a new peer of mine, writing for Bengals Talk SI, and has a Substack, Remember the Tight Ends. And I think still writes for the LSU blog. I can't remember the name of.
Yes, and the Valley Shook, yeah.
There you go. Yeah. So I brought Max on to do some combine review and some tight end talk. And of course, we got some news. But first, Max, how are you doing?
Doing all right, man. Doing all right. Just kind of doing the post-combine, go back and watch some guys that everybody does right now. I have some stuff that I'm working on for the site about fronts and D-line stuff. So I've really been watching a lot of that. But yeah, doing pretty well. How about you?
I'm doing great. Go start with the Oscars happened. Did you watch Honora? Do you have takes?
Not only did I not watch Nora, I'm usually like a good 7 to 10 years behind on movies.
Okay.
So I'll watch Nora in a few years. I
You just hit La La Land?
I literally, like, you're making a joke. I literally first watched La La Land like 3 months ago.
Okay.
So that's yes, actually, I am just hitting La La Land. All right, it was devastating.
I saw it in theaters. It was pretty good.
Oh my god, I can't.
I only saw it the once. No,
I would have to be wheeled out of there.
I saw Nora, but I saw it on my TV. I thought it was pretty good. I don't know. I might not be cultured enough to be like, oh, I understand why this won Best Picture. I was like, yeah, it's a fun movie. Took a little while to get going, but it was fun.
No, I bet it was pretty. I bet it was really good. And the one I'm actually really interested to watch, Conclave. That one I might
my
watch.
Wife watched it. Yeah, my wife watched it. That was one of her favorites. That and Brutalist, but she liked Nora too. She said they're all good. She watches like all of them, and I just pick one to watch with her. Pick the winner. Pick the sweep.
Yeah, but, there you go.
Anyway, let's get into some combine stuff. Well, news first. If you haven't heard, start with Tee Higgins got tagged. I feel like this was an inevitability for the Bengals to do. I mean, they weren't close enough on a deal to get the extension done. I mean, there was some pie in the sky hope that maybe they just do that. Hopefully, out of all the options, this is not a tag and play and let him go. And then I would say tag and extension. They just don't have a lot of people to pay, but leave it up to you. What thoughts do you have about the Tee Higgins tag?
Oh, I don't even have any. Like, we all knew this was, like you said, we all knew this was going to happen. It just extends the timeline to make a deal. I feel like if they were really intent on tagging and letting him go, they would have just let him hit the market now. But they're not gonna make him play on the tag for a second straight year. If that really happens, he's probably gonna hold out. I certainly would, but no, it's just a little bit of an extension. It's just to keep him off the market and keep the rights to negotiations. It's just like, it's the biggest non-story in football right now. It's
most guys who get the tag do end up, at least last year, I feel like most guys that got tagged got extended.
Right.
Especially when you're talking double tag, that cap hits so high. I think the thing that it just keeps proving is that this front office was just very inept at coming up with what they were going to do, because this should have just been an extension 2 years ago. You end up paying $50 million in guaranteed money on these tags anyway. If you just would have fronted the contract with that, you would have lower cap hits throughout. But that is something we have talked a lot about on the show, is about how they just don't have the urgency of a Philadelphia Eagles front office to get these deals done early. It feels like they just stay far apart. It ends up costing them more money because the cap goes up, and then the percentage of the cap goes up for the players. And overall, not great.
It's not a great way to run the team. Yeah, I mean, like, it's the narrative that the Bengals are cheap is sort of simple. It's a little too simple, because they, maybe that's their intent, but they end up, like you said, they end up paying the same general amount of money anyway. I mean, you can argue that they're cheap in letting guys like Jesse Bates and DJ Reader walk, but you're going to end up paying through the nose on the tag anyway. You're going to end up getting to a deal anyway. Like Jamar Chase is obviously going to get extended. He was going to get extended the whole time. And the only difference between doing it early and then doing it now is that it just costs more. So they're not really cheap as much as they're just like what do they think is going to happen in between now, in between then and a deal? Like, do you think the price is going to go down? Like, of course not. That's ridiculous.
No, they're just stubborn. They have a number, and that is their number, and then they don't negotiate throughout the season. So when they don't reach the same agreement, even they end up having to up their number just to make something realistic happen for a guy that they need in Jamar Chase and a guy they really want to keep in Tee Higgins, because the narrative has really shifted on that. Other news, Alex Kappa cut. This one kind of stinks for me because I understand he wasn't very good this year. He was actually pretty bad this year, very bad, and he wasn't very good last year. 2022, he was a pretty good player. And I feel like people have forgotten that really his play completely changed in that after that injury against Baltimore, where week 18 in a game, you don't know if they really needed to play. He ends up having, I believe it was Cordell Volson, found work on a guy Ted Karras was blocking and knocked him into Alex Kappa's ankle, broke the ankle, and he got carted off. When you have limited athleticism like Alex Kappa did, even though he's a good player with that limited athleticism, if you lose a step from that, you're now a bad athlete. And it is hard when you're aging to be a bad athlete because you pretty much have to be perfect. So this is just a case of like injuries stink. And I thought that the entire season watching him, it's like they don't have a guy they can go to instead of him. Like, unless you really think Cody Ford was going to be an upgrade, I think it's a pretty lateral transition. It's tough to watch a guy lose his career due to injuries, but it seems to be where we are. Hopefully he finds something. Maybe he can bounce back somewhere, but the cap hit was too high for what he was anymore. And injuries suck.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but he, like you said, he lost athleticism and he lost his anchor, which is just brutal. And the Bengals need an actual like cost controlled, franchise controlled answer at guard at some point. So I mean, this allows you to sort of just replace, whatever amount of money you were giving to him with another one, and kind of reset that timeline to where you were 2-3 years ago, which works because, like you said, he was a good player on the front end of his deal. So if you can do that, and then hopefully, whether you use a premium pick on one or you just start to be like other franchises and occasionally get somebody in the later rounds, you got to extend that timeline and then just hopefully find an off-ramp to a real solution somewhere along the way. But it obviously had to be done. That was pretty obvious. Yeah, it does mean they're getting a guard in free agency, I think.
I mean, I think they know the guard's a big issue because they benched Cordell Volson last year too. That's me reading the tea leaves of they know they need 2 new guards. I don't think they're going to go into the season. I think there's like a doomer scenario some people have talked about where it's like, they'll just go and they'll just have Cody Ford fight Cordell Volson for a guard spot. I think they know better. I think they'll at least bring in some level of competency there. Whether that is like Evan Brown or Will Hernandez and Will Hernandez and be the Cardinals East. It's something that I think they know needs fixed. Even though I think some people are reading too much into Duke Tobin saying something about like, we've got some guys in the building, we could always use upgrades. I guess talk. That's a nothing burger to me. Real thing is that they benched Cordell Volson during the season when he was healthy, and now they cut Alex Kappa. So they're not happy with the guard play.
Right. The concern, I think the realistic doomer concern is not that they're just not going to do anything. It's that they're unable to do anything that's more than a half measure, right? Because you would either have to spend through the nose or make a trade, which they won't do, or you have to hit in the draft. And the concern is that is not that they're just disinterested in fixing it. It's that they are unable to swing as heavy as they need to get a real one, to get like it's somebody not just trying to constantly patch the holes in the ship, but actually get a difference maker. Because like the Bengals, the unstated thing about the Bengals and the offensive line over the last couple of years is that in the fight to get to average, you need to be good. And the Bengals, have struggled to get to average. But people gotta realize that there's an entirely different level beyond that they do need to get to, at some point, especially with the way the NFL is going. Because I think PFF always made it such a big phrase, but like the creep back toward average days I think are just over on the offensive line at this point. When you look at the top offenses in the league, so the Bengals are going to have to hit here at some point, and that's the concern I have. But they're gonna, like you said, they're gonna do something.
Yeah, whether they successfully do something or they just get a 1-year Band-Aid and kick this to next season, which is not ideal, but is something they've done to tight end for the past 3 seasons. So let's starting with some early guys. What's Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland, I think, are the 2 guys that could go in the first round. I don't see the other ones happening, but I guess I've always been surprised by the draft. You remember Cole Strange getting drafted first round. So who is your preference for the Bengals? I can tell you, I think I know the Bengals preference, and I don't think it's going to make either one of us that happy.
Well, I mean, I actually don't know, because I think the Bengals have changed their way of thinking about this position pretty dramatically after Hayden Hurst and Irv Smith. They understand that, like, if you're going to be an 11 personnel based offense like the Bengals are, your tight end is generally going to be your 4th receiver. And so at that point, your 4th receiver versus, your number 1 auxiliary blocker, it's more important to have that ability to block in line than it is to catch the ball. So I think that if I do actually think that the Bengals' preference would be Tyler Warren, because I think that there's a lot of smoke about people in the league preferring Colston Loveland. I don't think I think there are going to be some teams. I generally don't think that's the case. Mostly because I think that the league has wisened up a little bit. That the 2010s, spread passing bubble is pretty burst. And that guys like George Kittle are going to be the most valuable things you can find at the position. But I do think it's pointless. Tyler Warren's not getting out of the top 12 to me. Either the Jets are going to take him or the Colts are at 14, but either his floor to me is Indianapolis. So I don't think that that's even an option unless the Bengals are willing to trade up for a tight end, which they're not going to do, nor should they, frankly. But they should not be trading up and
only 6 draft picks. They've never.
Unless Mason Graham falls to like 10, then I would do it. But
I don't know if they have ever traded up in the first round. So
no, they're not going
to. It's not likely.
No. So Warren's off the board. Loveland is, I think, a really, really great prospect too, and I actually think he's a good fit because he's big and he's strong. They really developed him well at Michigan as a blocker over his career. Going into last year, he was their number 1 Y. When they would get into 12 or 21, when they would get into heavy personnel, he was not the F. He was the Y. Like, he stayed there. And they trusted him to block in line at a high level, and he did really early. Then he hurt his AC joint, and he lost a lot in the upper body playing through it, which is fine because it's going to be totally healed per all medical reports and everything. He's 6'6", probably plays about 255 when he gets a little older because he's still pretty young. So like when he gets around 22, 23, 24. And starts to get into his prime, he's probably going to be that 6'5.5", closer to 6'6", like 255 range, which is like that's big. That's actual tight end size. And he's got 33-inch arms, so that helps him as a blocker as well. So as long as you develop the technique and spend time with it, I always say that tight end blocking is a product of three things. It's size, strength, and attention. And you have to have all 3 of those things. And if you do, you're probably going to be pretty good just because it's such a teachable thing. So I think if the Bengals were to get him into that role, he would be able to do everything they need him to do while being a sick receiver. And if you're an 11 personnel with Colston Loveland at the Y working on linebackers and safeties, that's a real actual matchup nightmare. And then when you get into 12, he can he can get into the slot and do all the Tyler Boyd stuff because he's like a similar athlete and route runner. So he would be a huge force multiplier, I think, long term for the Bengals. I would love that. I don't know how much I would love it with Kenneth Grant on the board, but like they both really work for me.
So I agree. I think Warren's gone. I think this is, I think Bengals fans have discussions about players and like, I wouldn't take that guy if he's available. I think of like Bijan when the Bengals pick like 30th or 29th.
Yeah, right.
I wrote a thing. I was like, yeah, I'd take Bijan 29th. People were like, no, I wouldn't. It's like, well, he's going to go in the top 10. So who cares? Like if I had that conversation with Ashton GT, it's like, he's going to go in the top 10. It's like worth having this conversation. I think
I would take Travis Hunter if he falls to 17. I'll just say that.
Yeah, right. But so Colson Levin's a guy I think you would talk a lot about with the Bengals, and I think they will like him a lot. I have only seen his game against Texas, and more than anything he did on the field, I think what impressed me the most was that Texas was matching him with like Jahdae Barron, and they just clearly respected the heck out of that guy. They were like, we're going to put I think our best coverage player against their tight end. And I think when you see that happen, you kind of go, oh, okay, this guy is like really good. This isn't just like good for tight end receiving. This is like a really good receiver. Who cares about tight end versus wide receiver? I think Bowers.
Yeah, I think he is. I think he is one of those guys. But it also does have to be said, as far as the Jahdae Barron thing goes, that Michigan he was the only pass catcher with a pulse on the roster. So you could have quadrupled him and not paid for it. But yeah, no, you're right. Like he really is that kind of route runner. He's that kind of mover. And there's the Texas game wasn't amazing overall, just because they were just like the offense was not functional. If you want like the real Colson Loveland experience, go watch last year's Maryland game, this year's Illinois game, and Fresno State to start the year when he was healthy. So you can actually see what the kind of player he is. Those are the games to watch. Like if he's that player in the NFL and he develops into that player, he's gonna be one of the 5 best tight ends in the league. Like to me, he's like the thing I compare him to is like he's like Trey McBride with 2 extra inches and about 10 extra pounds.
All right, Trey McBride, pretty good blocker. I think when I looked at the data on him, the holes I had were just that, at least the data says, pretty average contested catch guy, if not a little bit below that. And same with his yak creation. Do you think that is a product of the system, or do you think that might be a limit in his profile?
Yeah, I mean, he's just not that really. He's not really that kind of player. Like,
not a guy that just dunks on people.
Right, he's not. And there are even among the good tight ends in the league, there are actually very few above the rim guys.
It's funny because Gesicki's one of them. I had this conversation
right, ironically.
It's like, who are the best tight end dunkers? It's like that kind of went away. It's just like Mike Gesicki can do it.
Yeah, I mean, oh god, it used to be like the thing they did, right? Like you had Antonio Gates, literal basketball rebounder, Jeremy Shockey, who is dunking on people, Gronk, obviously, Jimmy Graham.
Yeah.
I mean, like Jimmy Graham, Mike Gesicki are more wide receivers, but still, like
Tyler Eifert, have to mention it. Bengals podcast.
They both tried to get on the tag as receivers, which you got to secure the bag, but you do turn in your tight end card when you do that. But yeah, no, like that's not really a thing that it's just it's Tyler Warren is that kind of guy, but it's just not really that important, especially when you're like the way you work is as not just a modified slot, but as a real one a lot of the time, right? It's your feel for space, it's your change of direction, it's your details and your routes. He gets open. So like he gets open well enough that I'm not worried about what happens when he doesn't. And as far as the yak stuff, his yak profile is pretty similar to like TJ Hawkinson and Mark Andrews, which is as a pass catcher, the exact kind of player that he is. So like he's very much like them in the sense that he's a super nuanced route runner. He just gets open, feels space, moves the chains, very much like a giant Jarvis Landry, who blocks in line, which is great. That's it's what you love in a tight end. I'm not worried about it at all. I don't even really care.
Sounds a lot like Mark Andrews, because a big thing with tight ends in the NFL is a lot of them, majority of them, don't really beat high quality man coverage. That's something I think people look at is like, how can he beat man coverage? Like, well, how often does Kelsey really do that? Like he wins leverage and he has just the mind meld with Patrick Mahomes for what he needs to do. But if you lined up, and the Bengals did this, like Trey Flowers, and just played really physical man coverage against him. It's not that it took it away. It's not like he can't do it. He's one of the greatest receiving tight ends we've seen. So he can do it. But again, it's something that's like, yeah, when you actually devote a lot of resources and play man coverage, tight ends, in the NFL aren't as useful. But at the same time, in the NFL, you pretty much see like 70%, 60% zone coverage. Right. And that ends up being so important for the Bengals have man coverage guys, if they're gonna play man,
I was gonna say that's what the wide if I have there's that meme I use on Twitter all the time, the John Hamm Mad Men meme where it's like that's what the money is for. That's what the wide receiver is for. Like, yeah. Like, oh, he's like, oh, can he beat man coverage? I'm like, why don't you have any receivers? Your team's gonna suck anyway.
Kind of saw this in the Michigan-Texas game. It's like they put their best coverage guy on him, and he did a good job. It's like, well, why don't you have a receiver that needs his attention?
Right. Like if somebody is playing man coverage to stop the Bengals tight end, I need to see Jamar Chase go for 600 yards in that game.
Right. That's just the Browns. Somehow the Browns can hold up in man coverage. Nobody else.
Yeah, Denzel Ward owns that guy.
Denzel Ward and all those guys wake up for that game. That's what I've always said is that like the Browns could be having like the 32nd ranked defense all year. They don't play like it against the Bengals. They all wake up. Greg Newsom's having a bad season. He wakes up. So Max, tight end expert on the show. Need to bring up some other guys too. I think people know about Tyler Warren, Colson Loveland. Let's probably have a quick Harold Fannin discussion because I don't think you're gonna agree with like what a lot of our listeners think. I have no clue about this guy other than he kind of runs duck-footed, like kind of
it's so weird.
But
he runs like a giant penguin.
Right. Travis Kelce could put up 1,400 yards, though, barely moving. Yeah. So it's not always about that. What is your quick take, like elevator pitch for, let's say Harold Fannin sits there in the third round. You're still looking for a starting tight end.
He's not going to, he can't do it. He won't start a tight end for the Bengals. Like he can't, he's 230
You think he could do the Gesicki stuff?
No. Because like Mike Gesicki's a wide receiver. Like Gesicki's got a degree of quickness and size. Like Mike Gesicki's, if Mike Gesicki were 220 pounds, 230 pounds, he would not be good. That's his whole thing is that he's like, if he didn't have the ability to box guys out and go up and get the ball. Now Fann's like decent at that, but like he's not going to be Gesicki, and he doesn't have the quickness. He doesn't have the flexibility in the hips. Like he's got decent change of direction, and you see a lot of these big like crossover step, like, hesitation moves at the top of his stems that look really nice on tape because like these defenders overcommit. He just doesn't have the juice in and out of breaks and athletically overall to be a wide receiver. And so there's just really nowhere to put him in a way that gets him honored as a blocker. He doesn't have the slot skills that Dalton Kincaid does, and Dalton Kincaid can't stay on the field because Khalil Shakir is just way better than him. And they're not willing to make the sacrifice in the passing game to gain nothing in the blocking. So it's just like, for me, a player like that is just like, this is how you find Kyle Juszczyk's. This is not. So unless the Bengals are going to get real cool about a bunch of stuff and start running a bunch of two-back, which I would love, like true two-back stuff, he's not a fit. He's just not a fit. He's a fit for a ultra condensed offense that likes to use a lot of true two-back runs and also get that guy out because in creative ways, like an Alec Ingold or a Kyle Juszczyk, because like it's just not. A lot of people compare it to Jonnu Smith. Like Jonnu Smith is the same height and he's like legit 250.
Yeah.
So even though he doesn't look it, and Jonnu Smith is not necessarily a consistent producer either. So no, it's just like he's kind of he's a two-bag gadget. He can't start a tight end. He certainly can't start a tight end for the Bengals. Like he's smaller than Irv Smith.
Yeah, hopefully taller. I didn't check that because Irv being like 6 foot. Okay, that was one of those things. Like I think tight end height matters. I think I'm going to point out. I mean, his data profile is insane. I think we both know this because every data guy points to him like that could be a first round pick. I haven't watched him, but I think when you watch him, you kind of go like, there's a lot of things about why. But what I found interesting was just his zone yards per out run, 100th percentile. Like he is like the number one guy against zone. So and I know you could talk about the MAC, you're probably not seeing the high quality stuff. You don't even see the same zone coverages in college a lot of the time.
Right.
But if he has a really good feel for it, I think there is a role for him. I do kind of agree with you. I think the blocking stuff is fake from what I've seen. I haven't watched him. But at his size and the highlights that people show, it's like, yeah, I don't know about that.
Yeah, look at him climb to this corner. Yeah, get that 185-pound defensive back.
But I do think if he's just like an elite mind with sitting in zones and winning leverage and finding the voids and just being somebody you could check the ball down to and will always be open against a zone coverage because he does a good job against that. I think there's a use for that. Haven't watched him personally. I know you're against him. I know a lot of Bengals fans love him. So I'm going to leave it there.
I don't think there's a use in it for us though, because like, because like you're just getting, because those are all slot receiver things.
Right.
So like this is I call this the wide receiver test. Like if your pitch is that you're going to do a bunch of wide receiver stuff, you better be able to be a wide receiver. And so it's like you look at the guys who actually succeed in this, like Dalton Kincaid can't carve out a full-time role doing this. Evan Engram can't even do it, and he was like a 4-4 guy who's like winning on the outside in the SEC. It's Kelsey, it's Brock Bowers, like these truly like elite slot receivers. For me, it's just like if I'm gonna go get that guy, I'm gonna go try to get like, I'm gonna you'd probably need to move back up into the early second to do this, and they probably wouldn't do it. But I would go get Elike Manor, like who also has inside out versatility and ran a 4.4. Like, would you like? You look at the guys who play this role in the NFL. They are almost all wide receivers. They're almost all wide receivers, and you have like 2 tight ends.
Yeah, so you do kind of run into the Dalton Kincaid variable there.
Except he's worse. Like he's worse than Dalton Kincaid.
Well, Kincaid did go in the first round, so that's expected. Well,
right.
But so there's 3 other options I think that happen on day 2, at least according to consensus: Elijah Arroyo, Mason Taylor, and Gunnar Helm. Give a quick compare contrast with those guys, and who do you like the most for the Bengals out of them? Say they all fall to let's say a 3rd round pick, because weird things happen.
Of those guys, I think Taylor is the best for the Bengals. I think I do like Helm, but Arroyo. We'll start with Arroyo. He's a project, like a big time project. He's got a lot of tools. He's pretty new to the position and he's developing rapidly. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him be a great player. But he's really just kind of a field stretcher right now. He doesn't he doesn't do the super translatable tight end stuff very well yet as a pass catcher. He's got the right frame. He's legit 6'4", 251. So that's good. So he's got that. He's got, I think, some raw strength, even though he's a total project as a blocker, like most of these guys are coming out of college. But even to an additional extent, he's got to develop a lot as far as change of direction, route running, feel for space, all that kind of stuff. So I like him. I like him for a team that doesn't have to really build a roster like the Bengals do. Like the Bengals need starters. Maybe not like, breaking their backs to chase needs, but they need impact starters and foundational pieces. So I don't love him necessarily for that, because I think he's project and a project at a, I just think that the Bengals need impact guys. Gunnar Helm.
I was gonna say one of the few guys I have watched, Elijah Arroyo. At least I've watched 2 games. I agree a lot. Like a lot of what he does is like catch like slide routes or just quick stuff, and sometimes some deep shots too. But it all seems, I don't know, not like you said, not translatable. Or the Bengals don't even run a slide RPO. Yeah, and like he's physical, he's fast. I think those are great. He catches the ball away from his frame. Like I like some things about him, but I don't see the stuff the Bengals would need because I don't see a very good block. I'm a harsh grader on tight end blockers. Like,
no, I'm as like I'm as harsh as it gets. Like
I don't
I
know
think
because I think you like Mason Taylor's blocking more than people. We'll get there because I was like, I don't think he can do it right now. I don't mean that ever, but we'll get there.
yeah, no,
Arroyo's
it's
hitting
all,
his slide, his sift blocks like head down, shoulder on the side. I'm like, get this out of here! Like he will get run over in the NFL trying that.
yeah. It's for me. It's just about I grade blocking kind of two ways, like performance and tools. Like if you suck at blocking because you don't have the strength, that's a serious problem. If you suck at blocking because your technique is bad, that's super fixable. Like Josh Oliver came out of college and basically is a wide receiver and is now the best blocking tight end in the league because he went to places, namely Baltimore, that were going to spend a lot of time developing it. Like I said, size, strength, and attention. If you have those three things, you're going to be a pretty good blocker. So it's, I don't know how much of a long term. I worry about the strength a little bit with him, just because even if he is 250, he is in a little bit more narrow of a frame. He's not
He
too
looks thin,
narrow.
thin for
He's
250
not.
to me.
Yeah. So like I think like
Not tall he is.
that it wouldn't shock me if he ends up not having the strength. I think he probably does if you develop him properly, but we'll see. But yeah, he's a project, and I see a lot of Noah Fant potential with him. Which isn't the worst thing with a day 3 pick or with a round 3 pick, but for a team that needs to find impact starters in all the first try to find them in all the first 4 or 5 rounds, that's not where I would go at tight end. Gunnar Helm, he's way closer to finished because I think he's complete as a receiver from the Y. I don't think he's ever going to be a guy that's going to flex out and do the Loveland, Trey McBride, Hawkinson, obviously Brock Bowers, Travis Kelce, but I'm really talking about like more real tight ends that can flex out as well. I don't know if he's ever going to do that at a high level, just because he's more of an airplane than a helicopter as a route runner, in the sense that he's good on the straight line routes, like stretching the seams, heading on like a deep over, like a sail. Those smoothness, straighter line routes he's really, really good at. He's got great feel for space in the underneath zones, and he's a little slippery after the catch. He can slide. Tight ends aren't going to be, unless you're Tyler Warren or Brock Bowers, aren't going to be juking people out too much. So if you're making people miss, you're sliding by them because you're smooth and silky. And he's the if I were building a tight end out of guys in this class, I would take his smoothness and his feel for space in the underneath, which when you're like a true Y body, which he is, and that's really what you're needed for as a receiver, is those straight line routes, underneath stuff, some silkiness after the catch as well, and good natural hands. So he's I think really complete as a Y receiver. As an inline blocker, I think he's really big and I think he's really strong. I don't think he knows how to do it yet, which is okay. Because I think that can be developed, especially with a guy who has the lower half that he does. He's a really good pass protector, which is a good way to tell, like a good cheat sheet way to tell if a guy has the strength to be a good run blocker, because so much of that is just lower half anchoring. Which he has at a high level. And when he does get it right with the hands and the weight distribution as a blocker in the run game, he can move dudes. He just never does because he doesn't know how to do it, which is, again, okay. College tight ends are terribly developed as blockers anyway, unless you're Tyler Warren or the guys who have to block. But so I like him for that. And Mason Taylor, he's, I think, similar in a lot of ways. He doesn't have this silkiness and fluidity in the hips after the catch that Gunnar Helm does. So that's why I do generally, just based on tape, prefer Gunnar Helm. However, Taylor's young, really like young. So there's a lot of untapped, not just developmental ability, but athletic ability. I think he's going to settle into being a little bit better of an athlete than he is. And I think when that happens, he could really take off because like he's pretty fast. He's very smooth, very controlled. He's got great length. He's got good length. He's big, exactly on the prototype 6'5", 250. He's just like, he's all the sliders to him are like at a B plus level. And I think that if he takes another step athletically and develops a little bit as a route runner, which I think he is doing, because he was doing a lot more as a route runner at the Senior Bowl than we'd seen him at LSU, just because the way he was used at LSU. He was such a pure Y, because in the first 2 years of his career, he had Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., Kyron Lacey, and Kayshon Boutte in his receiving room. They were going to occupy all three of the receiver spots. So it's hard for him to get flexed out. He was really good in the seams, just really, really good in the seams, really good in the underneath. And that's sort of what he was. So I think that there's something to build on with that as a foundation, plus the raw tools, plus the age. It's definitely easy to make a case that he becomes like a really good wide tight end of the league with maybe a little bit of flexibility. I don't think he has the bend in the hips to be an elite split out tight end necessarily, but I don't really care that much about that. Certainly for the Bengals, we're going to have a slot receiver in that role more often than not anyway.
As
blocker,
tools to, I think, become a good tight end, but I don't know if he's there just yet, especially as a blocker. But even as a receiver, I'm not sure 100% if he's a guy you want to throw out there right away. Maybe it's somebody you match with like a Jawan Johnson type signing, where it's like a 1-year deal that they keep doing these type of signings. Ian Thomas, just a vet that probably knows how to play the position a little bit. I know the Bengals, so probably a little bit more of a receiver than a blocker. They've got Drew Sample to block. And then you kind of mix in like either Helm or Mason Taylor in this scenario.
Frankly, though, I think Terrence Ferguson's better than all three of them.
Oh, nice. I was going to get there. I was going to say Terrence Ferguson just had a great combine. Is he in that conversation?
Better than all three of them.
Okay. Do you think he's a better blocker?
No. Okay. I think he has the same problem. Well, I think Taylor's better than Helm and Ferguson as a blocker, just because there are some areas in which his technique is pretty good. He's really good on outside zone. And I think that he does a decent enough job with his hands that he can be a little bit more controlled on your standard, downs and bases in gap scheme, like your head up stuff. And again, he's pretty good on outside zone. It's just that like some of the times he lets defenders get in his face a little bit, and sometimes he's a little bit upright. Those are easier fixes. I think all three of those guys can be fixed.
Yeah, they can be fixed, but also work to do as blockers. Right. But see, like Terrence Ferguson, he's a better receiver than any of those guys.
I think he's just got a little bit more of everything. I think he's quicker in the feet. So the change of direction stuff is better. I think he's a better athlete than both of them, as his combine would indicate. He's a great athlete. I think he's like those two guys as a blocker in the sense that he's got a strong lower half and good raw tools. He just doesn't know how to do it yet. He will be taught if he goes to someone who does right by him developmentally. But I just think he has way more quickness and change of direction than those two guys have, while still maintaining that smoothness that Helm and Taylor have, and the after catch ability that Helm has. So he just kind of has all the stuff. He's got all the infinity stones that those guys have, and I think he has a little bit of extra, and he has the proof of concept in a great combine at like legit 250.
Yeah, pointing out Terrence Ferguson, he actually has a better missed tackle force per reception percentile and yak per reception percentile than Gunnar Helm, and also better than Mason Taylor. Actually, Elijah Arroyo got the highest yak, but he has moved about tied for the lowest missed tackles force, and I think that's a lot of those wide slide RPOs I kind of mentioned.
Right.
Just by design. Also, just going to quickly mention Elijah Arroyo career contested catch percentile less than 2. He's in less than the second percentile, so that is not a guy who's going to dunk on people, most likely.
He's got to be if he's going to be a field stretching tight end too. Like that's pretty important.
Yeah. So probably a little bit quicker because we spent a lot of time on tight ends, as expected. Max does a lot of tight end work. But because it sounds like this might be something you're writing, what are you looking for in a Bengals target at the defensive tackle position and the edge position?
Oh, you have to be like, I don't want to say pass rush doesn't matter. Obviously matters because the Bengals can't rush the passer outside of, one guy who they're hemming and hawing about paying.
Yeah, they might hold out, might get traded.
Right. And it just so happens that he's the only guy driving the boat. So that's tough. But like if you sacrifice your ability to defend the run for the pass rush, you're not going to get either. Just because you're going to get hammered, and then teams are just going to be hitting you with play action stuff that's just like you're never going to be in the true pass sets where you can really like tee off, which is tough. The Bengals' first and most severe issue last year on defense was that they couldn't stop the run without loading the box, and they just don't have the DBs to hold up for that. They don't have, the pocket crushers to hold up for that. And, again, like the DB issue becomes a real problem. Like that's why Cam Taylor-Britt got so badly exposed, because like he was really just on a lot of islands. He's just not that kind of dude. He doesn't have the kind of recovery athleticism to get away with that, which is why he's just grabbing dudes all the time. But it all has that domino effect. And so if you can get a guy who is able to cancel gaps, who is able to be multiple in run defense, right? Whether it's shooting gaps when, you're facing a spread out team. But most importantly, being able to get, shaded or head up on guys against condensed formations, hold that space, cancel multiple gaps, and allow you to play light boxes, which reduces a ton of burden on your coverage unit, makes you better in coverage, makes you more multiple in coverage, makes you able to limit big plays as well. And that helps your pass rush a little bit. It all has that downstream effect. The Bengals' first issue is that they have to figure out how to stop the run without selling out. And so I think when you look at a guy like Kenneth Grant on the interior, who has legitimate athletic juice, some flashes as a pass rusher, but what he really is great at is just is crushing space in the run game. And at the edge, the Bengals have gotten so much crap for drafting unathletic big edges. I do think they're right about big edges. I don't think they're right about unathletic edges.
They usually get high explosion scores, and they don't care about like a 3-cone bend type thing. Like that kind of shows up with Myles Murphy a little bit, and I think why he doesn't finish all the time is guy can explode off the ball. His get off is almost as good as Trey Hendrickson's. He's second best on the team according to Next Gen Stats and according to my eye. But he's one, underdeveloped as a pass rusher, just hands wise. But two, he doesn't have elite bend, so sometimes he could win, but can't convert that win into a sack. Maybe it's just a pressure. So that's something they've always done. Carlos Dunlap was a little bit similar. Didn't have a ton of bend to him either, but he was also like 280 pounds. So
yeah, they're right. I think they're right. I think they're right about this. Like, and I think with the way the NFL is going, like if you want to play 4-down fronts, if your edges are small, they have to stay on the perimeter. And so if they add guys to the line of scrimmage, that just makes those guys wider and wider, which puts more and more space on the inside, which allows them to just mash you downhill. And like that, it kind of dovetails a little bit with the interior guys, because if you go get an interior penetrator, and the offense comes out with 2 tight ends attached to the line of scrimmage and tight splits, there's nowhere to penetrate. You're running right into dudes, and you're just getting pushed like a tackling sled. So those types of defenses that have those types of D linemen are in for, they're already getting hurt on the ground. If they come out and do that, if teams come out and do that again, like the 49ers, the Jets won't do it because they just hired Aaron Glenn to save them. But if like teams like the 49ers and the Texans, like if they come out and they do that again, they are going to get absolutely road graded against these teams. Yeah. We've seen flashes of it. So the Bengals need size. They need the ability to change the math in the run game, win up front. And as far as pass rushing profiles go, that usually ends up with pocket crushers. I'm pretty good with that. I just don't think it's a Walter Nolan, because I don't think they have the guys elsewhere on the line to bail him out for being small. If you were to pair Walter Nolan and Kenneth Grant as your nose and 3 tech, that works. But you don't. I
do think this is a little bit of a deep nose tackle draft. So if you go Walter Nolan, for me, what I've done in mocks and stuff, which is very easy for me to do, because if it doesn't work, you could just not post it, or you could just restart it. But you get Walter Nolan the first. I think you have to think we don't have a defensive tackle still. And then you go in the third and get a Jamari Caldwell or a CJ West or even a Jordan Phillips, like all those guys I think can be starting nose tackles, you're probably not getting Kenneth Grant in the second. Like that's, and
right.
It's probably also not a great idea to spend back-to-back picks on your defensive tackle room because you have a lot of issues. But
no, of course you're not doing that. Right.
Right. I think you can find a nose tackle in this draft because I was a little impressed with the nose tackles, the depth at nose tackle in this draft. So I'm not going to push back entirely because I think you're right a bit about Walter Nolan is like, it's a fit in a pass rush perspective, but can you get to the pass rush
right
down?
Yeah, no, I just mean in isolation. Like if you have a plan to do that
or if you
works for me.
sign Roy Lopez or one of these other nose tackles out there, and then it frees you up to do that pick. But I think at the moment it's something that's thought of as a perfect fit, and it's a little bit more of like a 50-50 fit to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm with you there. I think the edge stuff, we won't harp on it too long because I think Bengals fans, if I have the pulse on it, is they hate the size at edge. But I think I do agree with you a bit. And I think the only thing I'll say is I think you can be a solid to even pretty good edge run defender if you just have a maniac in you. If you just have like what Nolan Smith has, where he just wants to wear the blood of his opponents on his jersey. Like if you have that in you,
he's not a 4-down edge.
He does play it in Philly too, though. He does play.
But like in nickel, like if they get in a situation where they're going to have two tight ends on the line and he has to reduce inside, that's going to be a problem against bigger tight ends certainly going forward. Like they don't want to do that.
In space, that guy is a monster. I mean,
right.
I don't think I've ever seen anybody knock Trey Smith back on a pool like that before. Even a big edge.
They teach that at Georgia, the
denting the front instead of spilling or boxing.
Yeah, literally just cave it in with a hammer. It's awesome. But yeah, I mean, he is an outlier in size, but at the same time, like if you're gonna play true 4-down like the Bengals are going to, you just can't reduce those guys
blown off
inside.
The ball. Right. Or you might get doubled and blown off the ball. I agree there. It's but there's big guys that Deone Walker, and that's not an edge, but big guys. The guys are huge that don't really have that anchor in the sand.
No, that's true, but he's too big. He's too tall. I think he's like that's outlier in the other direction. If Deone Walker were like, he also has tiny legs. Did you see him at the combine? Like
he built like Johnny Bravo.
Yeah, that was you tweeted that. That's so right. He's literally built like Johnny Bravo. That's not going to work. But he can't. Johnny Bravo can't anchor. He gets blown off the ball by guards. But like I just think that, especially
Johnny Bravo, not a functional athlete.
No, he's not.
No lower body.
He is not.
He's a glamour boy.
Yeah, he did not test well. I don't even think Johnny Bravo was invited to the combine. He's going to work out at his pro day.
He's not doing an explosion. He's just showing up and benching.
His vertical 6 inches and his bench is like 70 reps.
Right. Well, this is great. I think we could talk a long time about this. Maybe have to have you back on, but we are hitting pretty late into the podcast, so I don't mean to cut everything off. But it was good to get your perspective on a lot of this draft stuff. Where you can plug your own thing here, all of what you do. I did at the top of the show, but some people weren't paying attention. Maybe they need the second one because they do it at the end of the show.
Yeah, you can find me at Bengals Talk. That's I'm really excited to get started on. I just got the ball rolling with some later round tight end fits last week. Talked about all the guys we sort of discussed and a couple of extras. With that in mind, I do have my Substack that we mentioned at the beginning. Remember the tight ends. There's a lot of stuff on related to that on my Twitter account at Max Toscano 1 as well. It's just it's really, I think, a unique space in the football media sphere. Just talking about that specific position that is both under discussed, really, really, really misunderstood, and super important to determining what the identity of an offense is. Just because you're going to have 5 offensive linemen, you're going to have minimum 2 receivers, you're going to have a quarterback, you're going to have a running back, and then what your tight ends are skill set wise just say everything about what the offense is. So it's just something that I think needs a light shined on it. So I'm excited to be doing that. And yeah, I mean, pretty much everything you can find on my Twitter, it all ends up there eventually. So yeah.
Okay, and this is Mike at Bengals_Sands. You probably know that if you listen to the show, but maybe you came as a Max person and wanted to check out the show. But thanks for listening to It's Always Game Day in Cincinnati. We will see you again next week.